So the origin of this sefer is because for me, decades I've been counting Sfiras Omer. And since I come from Hasidim, like 98% of us does, because Lithuania was totally killed out. And so I say, Hayom Chesed Sheba Chesed, Gvura Sheba Chesed, Tiferes Sheba Tiferes, etc. I never knew what I was talking about. And then I would look at this right side of me when I learned in the biggest yeshivas, Lakewood, Mir, etc. Do you know what this means? No idea. And then you would shake your eyes and chuckle. And I said, a few years ago, let's try to figure this out. So it was ma'ayin in Sfarim. And after that in Shul, every time by Sfiras Omer, if it was Shabbos, where I would give a klap and say, by the way, we're about to count Sfira, and this is what this Sfira, the message of this Sfira is. And Chazal, the ones who were Koveya the Sfiras, they put it here, it's really a gift to Klal Yisrael, because we all want to grow. We all want to be bigger, certainly at the end of Sfiras Omer, but we want to grow even from day to day. But we need a guidebook. And unfortunately, a lot of life just doesn't come with an instruction book. And here they actually gave us an instruction manual saying how you can grow over these 49 days. And what a waste it would be not to take advantage of it. So I'll give you an example. There are 7 midas, chesed, gevurah, tiferes, netzach, and they sound very lofty, which they are, but they also have a simple meaning as well. So chesed means pure love, pure kindness, pure giving. Because that's where all relationships start with. Every relationship is, I would like to get from you and give to you. It starts with chesed. And what is the concept of gvura? Gvura means chesed, unabated and unrationed, right, can really burn out in a hurry. So gvura is supposed to be sort of like a limitation on the chesed, a restrictor as to when chesed is appropriate, when it's not appropriate, how to use chesed. Tiferes is, well, on one hand you have chesed saying, give, 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 and gvura saying, no, no, no. Tiferes says, it's called beautiful. What's beautiful? Harmony. When we can actually balance out, when are we giving, when shouldn't we be giving, and when we have that really judged well, that's Tiferes. What is Netzach? Netzach means you've given, you've created a relationship, but relationships have ups and downs, right? Every marriage, even parents and children, sadly there are times they don't speak to each other. Relationships need grit. It's not enough to have all of the above. You need to be able to push through hard times to maintain a relationship. So Netzach, which is Netzachen or Tzmidius, means these are the looking at the chesed and saying, how do we do it in a way, how do we give it the energy to allow it to continue even when times would say it shouldn't? And what is Haid? Haid is sometimes you can power through, and sometimes the best way to get through is with humbleness, bowing your head, listening, not talking. America is very about talking, and sometimes not talking is the best thing, right? And Yesod is, how do we take all of this energy and turn it into a relationship? Yesod means the Yesod of a building. How do we take these things and create foundations where it can move forward? And Malchus, which is a very complicated one, but on some level Malchus means, how do I take this energy, and if I've elevated myself to a position where it can now speak with a higher tone. I could use the position I'm in, right, to give, but on a higher level. So I'll give you an example of, let's say, Chesed Sheba Malchus, right? This guy went to visit a hospital. He went to Shari Tzedek Hospital in Yerushalayim. His grandson was born. He's so excited. He goes to the hospital, comes into the hospital, and he sees the most wild thing. Getting out of a car is a kala, and she's dressed in her gown. She's wearing her hair, she's made up. There's a girl behind her carrying her train, and she's rushing into the hospital. He said, what a strange scene. So he inquired, and he found out that this girl had read in the Kaf HaChaim and other Sfarim that a kala at the time of her chuppah is a very elevated madrega and can give a bracha. So she said, right before the chuppah, I'm going to the children's ward and I'm going to give a bracha to every single child, and then I'm rushing back to the chuppah. So this is pure chesed, but it's not regular chesed. This is chesed where she's taking her authority now as a kala, her elevated position. So this is chesed shebemalchus. So for example, after every day we ask a question, where in your life could you do this? So for example, almost all of us, in some way, in some area, speak with authority. It could be as a parent, it could be as a principal, it could be as a teacher, it could be the gabbai in the shul. And when you give the chesed coming from that authority, that's chesed shebemalchus. And it's very different than chesed shebechesed. So I'll give you an example, chesed shebechesed, that we bring in the Sefer. And I heard this story from David Pelkowitz. Just a beautiful story. He said that there was a boy who lived in the 5 towns who lost his father. And he was crushed. He just couldn't get past it. He was a good boy in yeshiva. He stopped learning. He was too depressed. The principal gave the mother an idea. He said, take your son to Ramat Yosef Solomon. He's a goyin, he's a tzaddik, ask him to give a bracha to your son, maybe he'll be able to console him. So she got an appointment, and they came to Ramat Yosef. Now remember, Ramat Yosef never met the boy before, didn't know the parents. So just agreeing to give you time like this is chesed, right? Ramat Yosef listens very carefully. The boy is telling him how he misses his father so much. Ramat Yosef stops, he says to the boy, do you know, when I was your age, I lost my father too? And I never got over it. So he says to the boy, let's make a club, me and you. And he took out an index card and he wrote it. This is going to be called the No Dads Club. No Dads Club. And he wrote on the top the boy's name. And then he wrote Vice President Mati Solomon. And then he told the boy, give me your mother's phone number. And he said, here's fine. Because sometimes the president and the vice president have to talk to each other. Right? That's how it works in a club. And he gave the boy the card. He took the other card. He put it in his desk. He says, I'm keeping it here. And he wished the boy well. And the boy left. And the mother said, he didn't just leave. He flew out of there with wings. Why is that chesed shebechesed? Chesed is when we do something kind. Right? It's love. Chesed shebechesed means we did it with such a kindness that it's hard to do better than that. That would be chesed shebechesed. Right? Now, when you go to the next midas, the gevura, I'll give you an example. So the question would be here, after chesed shebechesed, the chesed would be, where in your life can you do a chesed? But not an ordinary chesed like writing a tzedakah, but it's a chesed that really hits home. It's like a beautiful and perfect chesed, right? Like, there's a woman who is taking care of a very, very ill child at home. Very sad. Somebody with chesed writes a check to the family to help for the kid. Chesed shebechesed is when the person who's giving says, the mother is falling apart. And I'm writing out this check to a very good therapist that I know you know, and now you'll be able to take care of yourself. Whereas if I just gave it to the family, it would just pay another bill. So that's chesed, but like chesed squared. Right? Now when you go to gevura is about one of two things. It could mean restraint, or it could mean something that takes great energy. Like a tremendous amount. So there's a story here of a girl who was undergoing cancer treatment. She was 11 years old when she was probably in 6th grade. And she lost all her hair. Now, when you're 11 years old and you lose your hair, and you're a girl, it's devastating. So she put on a kerchief and she came to class, and obviously extremely distraught. The next day, 4 of her friends went to a barber and had their heads shaved. Right? And they came back to class and they were glowing. They realized that's gevura shebechesed. It's a chesed, but it's not about just writing a check. It's something that takes real energy. When you're an 11-year-old, to shave your head, to walk around with little patches coming out, that really takes strength. That would be chesed shebegvura. There's another type of gevura not so much that it takes strength, but it's about limiting, right? And two ways chesed. Something that needs strength is good, but it also means restraining. I'm holding back. Right? I'll share with you an amazing story. There was a tzaddik in Vienna before World War II. His name was Reb Moshe Labiana. He was a original Einikel. And he was like the Rebbe of Vienna. Big Goyin, he wrote Sfarim. And the government in Vienna was particularly anti-Semitic. I mean, Hitler came from Austria, right? And they decided they wanted to be machsham. They wanted to get him to say the wrong thing, that they could lock him up. So they sent two mishumadim, two converts who were Jews who were real anti-Semites, to Ramosha with the goal of tripping him up. So they came to Ramosha Labiana, and they said to him, Rebbe, I have to tell you something, terrible thing. Me and my wife, we married 20 years. After 20 years of davening, we finally had a baby, a little baby boy. He's an amazing, wonderful child. Now he's 18, and we just got a notice from the army that he's being drafted. Could you tell me, how do I get him out of the draft? Should he run someplace? Should he hide? If he cuts off his gun finger, they'll let him out. And he's crying, and Ramosha Labiana looks at him and he says, tell me this story one more time. So the guy starts crying louder, and he says the story again. And not only me, my wife can't eat. She's throwing up. She's our only child after 20 years. Ramosha Labiana says, tell it to me one more time. And the guy repeats the story, crying louder. And the guy next to him is also puts his head down. This was the witness. And Ramosha Labiana listens to the guy after the third time, and he says, what can I tell you? It's Dina de Malchusa Dina. We have to respect the government. I don't have an answer for you. I'll send him to the army, and I'll be mispal. Send him with it to Hillim. So these two Mishumadim went out. They were so upset. And then it became known a few months later, that they had tried to entrap him. So they came running to Ramosha Labiana, and they said, oh, what a moifis. So Ramosha Labiana said to them, I'll tell you something. It's not a moifis. He said, my grandfather, the Rizhin Tzaddik, used to say, any place in the world, if there's a Yid B'tzar, I could feel it in my heart. He said, I'm not my grandfather, but if there's a Yid who's standing here, and er weint, and ich spür gar nicht, I don't feel anything, it's a ken nicht sein. So here he used this intuition not to give. So Gvura is many times you shouldn't be giving. This would be an example. So now I would ask you, where in our lives to do? Where in our lives would we like to give, but maybe it's not the smartest thing, so don't. You really want to give your son, daughter, a credit card. Maybe he doesn't need a credit card. Maybe he doesn't need an iPhone. Maybe he doesn't need a phone. Maybe that extra toy. Whatever. Where is giving sometimes corrupt, right? More than actually help. So that's the avodah through Gvuras. Either where does it need extra strength, or where not a good idea. And where in our lives could we adapt that? And when you see that through each one, you say, oh, it's true, it's very high and holy, but it's also very one part of the midas. These are midas that we can try to bring into our lives too. So I'll give you an example. Tiferes shebegvura. Tiferes means beauty, and gvura means restraint. So it's hard to understand what that means. So I have a story. There's a teacher, beloved in the entire school, right? And the most beloved teacher. And she has a party at the end of the year. And she announces, whoever I love the most gets to be my helper next year. And all the kids were clamoring. They wanted to be. And then one kid who was not such a good student, a shlamazelnik a little bit, this, that, she said, you're my student. And the kids, and one of the kids said, it was 20 years later when I realized this kid was being left back, and she was doing it in the most beautiful way. So that's gevura, when you have to do something that requires, restraint, you're not going. But think of how beautifully this was done. That's tiferes shebegvura. Like when you have to punish, can you punish with love and with thought and with kindness, as opposed to with koilus abrakim? Now you have kids that they go to school and a teacher punishes them and they never recover from it. And then there's somebody who punishes with so much elegance that everybody wants to be the one who's being punished. That's tiferes shebegvura. And so in the 49 gates, we try to, in each one, say, what is the midah that Chazal are giving us here? And how can you use the midah? Right? My wife told me a story. She said when she was in school, there was one girl, she came from a difficult home, etc., broken arm. She walked in and her buttons were 2 buttons were open on her blouse. And the teacher stopped in the middle and she said, we can't learn Torah because there's somebody here whose blouse is unopen. And everybody turned around and looked at this girl. My wife said, the girl got up, took her knapsack and walked out of the room. And she said she did not come back ever again to the school. And it was years later they saw her by a class get-together, many years later. So we can really hurt with gevura, or tiferes shebegvura says we can do it so beautifully that the person doesn't know what's happening to them. In fact, they think they're being elevated. What is netzach? We're doing gevura. Gevura is one of the difficult ones. I thought it's a good one to start with. Netzach is about grit, ability. Gevura is about strength. What does it mean when you do grit and strength? Like, why does strength need grit also? So I'll share with you a story I heard from Rabbi Shari Eli. We learned together in Eretz Yisrael years ago, decades ago. I remember he once told me this story. He said that the Steipler was in the Gulag in Siberia, right? And it was beyond freezing. And it was Shabbos. He had to go. It was his job to chop wood. And if he wanted to go on, they would kill you. So it was clearly piguach nefesh. So there was a guy who chopped. He came. And the guy who chopped wore a very, very heavy coat that he was supposed to give to the Steipler. Instead, he put it on a bush. And the halacha is you're not so mishtamish be'ilan b'Shabbos, right? So the Steipler didn't want to take the thing. So he started chopping and he said, it's really cold. I'm just going to chop for another 5 minutes and then I'm going to put the coat on. And after the 5 minutes, he said, I'm just going to chop for another 5. I could hold out another 5 minutes. And with that 5 minutes, he did it again. And he did not end up taking the coat the entire night. That is netzach shebegvura. Gvura means the energy to say no. But even if you say no, it's really hard to continue the no again and again. Netzach is when you use a midah that says, I will figure out an eitzah. I'll figure out all kinds of tarbois that I will be able to continue the no, to prop up the netzach. I will give the netzach strength. I will give it metal, right? I will give it grit. That's netzach shebegvura. So again, here the question would be is, where in your life do you have to do something difficult? But doing something difficult over a period is hard. I'm just thinking of a diet. Diets are hard, right? First hour, the first New Year's resolution, as they say, by January 15th, nobody's going back to the gym anymore. Right? So gevura is difficult. Netzach shebegvura is where are you doing something difficult? And try to think of ideas. How can I possibly find the energy to keep on doing this? You made a commitment. Commitments die quickly. I'll give you an example of something that I do in my personal life. When I make a commitment that's really hard, or that's semi-hard or really hard, what I'll do is, I just did this recently. I went out, I did it on Amazon, and I bought a plastic tombstone. And I wrote in it, congratulations, David. And I wrote what my goal was to accomplish it. Now, I'm a long way, at least a year away from accomplishing it, maybe more, but it's sitting on my desk. And if it's sitting on my desk, that means that there's a chance that I will accomplish it, right? In other words, netzach is giving gevura legs. I heard over from my Mechutner, Meir Goldwicht. He said he once was speaking someplace about Gematrias. He loves Gematrias. He was speaking about the Gematria 26, which is the Gematria of Shem Havaya. And he was talking about it's what a Helig Gematria it is. He said, and there was a lady in the back, and she got up. And she said, Rabbi, she pulled up her sleeve. Look at my tattoo. 471623. You add it up, it's 26. She said, in the camps, anytime I thought I'm not going to make it anymore, I would count up the numbers and I would say, if I have 26 on my arm, that means I'm going to make it. That is the midah of Netzach Shebegvura. The camps were all about Gvura. Netzach is how do you give legs, teeth, right? How do you give resilience to the Gvura? And that would be what I would say. Think of your life something difficult, and it's hard, you're proud of it, but you don't know if you could continue. What eitzes can you put on to continue? You really want to lose the weight? Go out and buy an outfit and hang it in your closet at that other size, and every time you open the door, it's standing there. That would be an eitzah for Netzach Shebegvura. You could do it in Dvarim Gashmi, you could do it in Dvarim Ruchniim. Right? Now, Haid is one of the really difficult spheres. Haid is humility, humbleness, and it's hard to understand, like, why would this midah give me legs? Like, how can I possibly use this midah in a positive way? Let me share with you a story. Such a beautiful story. When I learned in Eretz Yisrael, I used to go to Rav Gustman all the time. He was a big goyin and a tzaddik. He was on the Bezdin or Chaim Ozer. And there was an amazing thing that happened. There was a fellow, Robert Aumann. He was a Nobel Prize winner in game theory. And he lost his son in Lebanon. A half track went over a mine, blew up, he was killed. And he was sitting Shiva. And the prime minister came, and the president came, and he wasn't Makabel Tanchumen. And then Rav Gustman came. And he used to daven sometimes in Netzach Yisrael. So Rav Gustman sat down next to him, and he said, Ruvain, I have to share with you something. I also had a son who died. In fact, he was my only son, my Ben Yachid. He was killed when I was a partisan. Rav Gustman would say they threw him up in the air and they caught him on a bayonet. He was a little boy. He said, but your son, he said, was zeicha to die protecting Klal Yisrael. My son died in vain. He said, your son had Kvuras Yisrael. My son was never zeicha to Kvuras Yisrael. We had to run. I don't know what happened to him. He said, you got to sit Shiva on your son. He said, I was alone. I didn't have a minion to sit Shiva to visit me. He said, I didn't get to sit Shiva. So he looked at Robert Aumann, the Nobel Prize winner, and he says, come, I'm going to sit on the floor next to you, and let's sit Shiva together for our sons. And they did. And Aumann said he was the only one who was able to be Menachem. But what's the point here? He didn't come in with speeches and, chizuk, and he came in with humbleness. He says, look how broken I am. Look what I went through. And that was what it captured the person sitting Shiva. So that is sort of like Haid. That is the concept of Haid, when you use humbleness to take you someplace that otherwise you would never be able to go to. Your Said is about taking all of your strength, your love, your midas, and projecting them outward to create a relationship, something for the other person to hold on to. Right? It's about the midas coming forward, about coming out of the ground. That's your Said. I'll share with you a story, beautiful story. There was a boy in Eretz Yisrael. He was learning challenged. I'm not sure exact diagnosis. He very much wanted to say the Haftarah by his parsha, by his Bar Mitzvah Sedra. So the parents got him a Rebbe. They were good parents, and the Rebbe prepared and prepared and prepared and prepared. A week before, or 2 weeks before the bar mitzvah, there's a knock on the door, and the father's Bar Shlomo Zalman, and he's all panicked. What's the matter, Shlomo Zalman? I'm making a mitzvah, no? My son wants to learn, and he prepared, no? He says the Rebbe did not realize that even though the parsha was Vayakel Pikudei, right? Rosh Chodesh was the next day. So that lane Machar Chodesh did only what he's supposed to lane. Imagine that. And my son, it took him 10 months to learn the Haftarah. He's not learning the Haftarah, new Haftarah again in 2 weeks. So Reb Shlomo Zalman said, sit down. He took out the Shulchan Aruch. He went through the Poskim. He said, it's fine if you read the regular Haftarah. And a b'diavad, it's fine. And tell the Gabi of the Shul that that's how I paskined. Comes the Bar Mitzvah, it's the day of the Bar Mitzvah, and the Bayit Vagan. The whole Bayit Vagan is astonished. What happened? Reb Shlomo Zalman walked from Shari Chesed to Bayit Vagan. It was at least an hour. And he was in his 70s to come to the Bar Mitzvah. Somebody asked him, why did you do it? He says, because with the kanoim hind, he's sure Shambis is going to start screaming and yelling. He says, but if I'm standing here, nobody's going to have the chutzpah to say anything. So he walked for an hour, right? So that is netzach, right? It's grit, I mean, the koyach to do that. Shebi yisai, to be able to, somebody else, establish a foundation. It's giving a foundation legs, doing it with netzach. So it's grit, but creating it's reaching directly out to give somebody else legs. And here the question would be, in your life, where is there someplace, right, that you can really help somebody else get established? That you could use your energy to create a groundwork for somebody else, helping them with their education, helping them with their learning, but where you could use your grit to give somebody else that energy, that's Netzach Shebi Yisod. Yisod is about giving somebody a foundation, strengthening a relationship, and Chesed is about love and kindness. So I'll give you a story that sort of explains how the two come together. The Leshem, right, the grandfather of Rebbe Yashiv, was considered by many people in Lita to be the greatest makubal in the world since the Gra. After the Gra, he was considered in Lithuania the biggest makubal in the world. But Kabbalah in Lithuania was not a very big item, right? It was mostly Lamdish, Gemara, Rashi, Taisvis, Rishonim, Shas Paiskim, right? So he spent 20 years of his life, and he wrote a sefer called Leshem Shvoiv Achlama. It's after 3 different stones on the Choshen, and that's how he became known as the Baal HaLeshem. After 20 years of working on it, he was a bitter Araman. He was poor as a church mouse. He was a Rav in some little city in Lithuania. He published 500 copies of it. And it went all around Lithuania. People looked at it. They didn't really know what to make of it. I actually, when I was in Eretz Yisrael, I was fascinated. I got a copy, my hands on one. And I opened it up, and the first, I don't know if it was the first, Bebir Olam Hatayu. You can understand why it wasn't a bestseller, right? Explaining the world of the Cambrian, pre-Cambrian, it's, Al-Pi Kabbalah, right? So magically, one volume made its way across the world to Baghdad, about as far from Lithuania as you can get. And who was the Rav of Baghdad? The Ben Ish Chai, who was a great makubal. And the Ben Ish Chai said, when he opened up the Leshem, he said it's as if the sun shone out of it. And he was enthralled by it. So every day for a year, he learned the Leshem, and at the end of the year, he made a siyum on it, and he invited all of Baghdad to come in their big day Shabbos. And afterwards, he wrote a long letter to the Leshem with, his thoughts and this. But what he sort of how it changed the world of Kabbalah, the Sefer. And eventually, years after years, it made its way back to wherever he was at that time, the Baal Leshem. And he opened up the letter, and he started to cry. He said, if I would have gotten this letter 10 years ago, there would be a chelik beis to the Leshem. In other words, even the greatest people need visibility. Nobody wants to be invisible. Everybody wants to have somebody recognize him, right? Invisibility is a curse, right? One of the worst things you could do to somebody is put him in solitary confinement. So, chesed shebiyasod is, where can I do a chesed that gives my friend, my partner, my spouse, my child, a stranger, but it gives them ground to stand on? Where can I say that wonderful word that gives them standing? That's the concept of chesed. And I've heard other stories like this. I heard this one, Reb Beryl Wein said over a story. He said he was once in America, and he had to go to a deli. He was hungry, so he went into a big deli, beautiful deli, Coney Island Avenue. And there was a friend of his from Yeshiva from decades ago, slicing corned beef. So he went over to the guy, and he said, Yossel, what a beautiful deli you have. It's mamish beautiful. And Yossel looks up at him, stops and says, it's not my deli. I just slice meat here. So Reb Beryl Wein said, I blurted out without thinking. I said, but you were such a Baal Kishrin. And Yossel looked at him and he said, well, how come nobody ever told me that? The people around him were missing the midah of chesed shebiyasod. So this week, if you want to be, or today, if you want to be kind of the midah of chesed shebiyasod, think of somebody that if you told him how smart he is, or you told her how smart she was, it would make a difference in their life. That is the midah of chesed shebiyasod. And the last of the midas is malchus, right? And malchus is where somebody uses their stature to create something unusual, one of the midas. I'll give you one of them that I use for malchus sheba malchus. There was a big tzaddik in England. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Segal. Right? You do think it's tzaddik. And people would come from all over, and sadly, many people who would lose kids would come to him. And one of the things he would hear from parents is that I lost a child. I'm supposed to be taking care of my child, and now I don't know where who's taking care of him. I'm sure he's in Shemayim, but who's watching him? And he heard this interesting, you should never know from such a Sarah. He heard this story numerous times. And when he came to be buried, he wrote his tzava, I don't want to be buried in the Chelkas Harabanim. I don't want to be buried next to my Rosh Hashiva. I don't want to be buried by the Chashuvim. I want to be buried in the middle of the children's cemetery, among the children. So that when parents come to see their child, they see that I am standing guard over them. This is called the midah of malchus, where you use your authority and your stature to create a hatava that would otherwise be impossible. And the question is, where in our life do we have stature that we could create a hatava from? And this is the story of the 49 gates. To give each of one, to open the gate and to say, this is what it's about. And now the question is, for this one day, could you work on this single midah? Step through the gate, because there's a great light shining there. And here's something interesting. The Mekubalim never told us to be involved in Kabbalah, right? I remember when I learned in Eretz Yisrael, I was fascinated by the Baal HaLeshem. You couldn't get the Sefer, it didn't exist. There were a few hundred copies, and I once asked somebody, I went into Stitzberg, it was a farm store, and I said, would you have a Leshem? And he looks at me and says, why would you want a Leshem? What would you know about the Leshem? Right? So we're not supposed to touch it. It's so far away. It's for somebody, Lashech Hazal, Milei Kreisoi Shasu Paiskim. And suddenly, for one tiny window for 49 days, they gave us the 49 spheres, and they said, we don't care who you are. Talmud Chacham, Nishkin Talmud Chacham, can say Nafruma Behema. We're giving this for you. So this is such an opportunity to step into that gate and to see that light. And that's what we hope to accomplish.